Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneur Show powered by the Ninja Zone, the only podcast for sports entrepreneurs that gives you an inside look into what it takes to turn your passion for sports into a business.
Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Henry Ford. Hey, sports entrepreneurs. I'm Megan Knoll with Ninja Zone. Our weekly inspiration comes from your host's own Instagram. Get your own daily dose of inspiration by following her at Casey Wright NZ. Whether teaching cartwheels to kids, coaching skilled athletes, or mentoring business professionals, this week's guest has been teaching in one form or another his entire adult life. Jeff Metzger is the owner of Kids First Sports Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the brains behind Small Business Boot Camp, where he teaches his unique approach to business with industry professionals all over the world. This week we'll discuss when to break out of your old life and start a new one while channeling your, quote, bosshood. Before we jump into the conversation, just a reminder to stick around until the end where I'll give my recap and top takeaways. You can also check out all the links and show notes at thesportsentrepreneur.com. Now let's get to it.
And thank you for joining me this week as I sit down with Mr. Jeff Metzger. He is the founder and president of Kids First Sports Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, a very awesome Disneyland of sports of the Midwest for kids. And that's my intro, not his. But Jeff has been a mentor of mine since I knew him, and I'm so excited for this because I get him one-on-one to pick his brain and learn more about sports and business. And the most amazing thing about Jeff and Kids First is they actually have roughly 24 different enrichment programs at Kids First, almost 24 different sports and activities for children. So he has a lot to offer us. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Casey, it's a true pleasure. I've found it great getting to know you better over the recent years, and I'm pleased and happy to be here on your show.
Thank you. Well, so, I mentioned in your bio, 24-ish, give or take what's coming or going, different programs inside of a facility that is ginormous. How big is your facility?
Currently, it's 108,000 square feet.
Geez Louise. And it's pretty much all children, right? Do you have any adult activities going on right now?
Yeah, I think the best answer to that is no. Every now and then we'll have an ancillary adult activity, but it's really not worth talking about. Our specialty is kids.
Got it. Well, I try to, I stop in there frequently because there's always something new. You guys have always been the innovators in providing, new programming and knowing what your people want. And it's impressive. Just really impressive. So another thing about Jeff, everyone, and I'll say this, is he also has a separate, I don't know if you would call it a separate business or a separate something, but Boot Camp, which is a small business owners conference, like a full immersion small business owners conference for children's enrichment centers twice a year. And this was something that I've attended several times and my staff has attended. And ironically, Angie Tyler, who was on the show previously, mentioned the Small Business Boot Camp and how impactful it was for her business. So I kind of want to start there because so many of the listeners of the Sports Entrepreneur are the big question is how do I get started? And I know that I went to boot camp after things were already messed up. And had I had that clean, fresh start and platform before I started my business, it would have saved myself a lot of headaches. So give us a little, just a look inside what you're trying to accomplish with boot camp.
Well, first of all, Casey, I remember well our discussions during your first trip there to boot camp. So my memory does go back that far. Boot camp, what is boot camp? It started in 1991, and if my math is right, that's 27 years ago, so that somewhat dates me. It started because I looked at at our success, and I debated about a franchise model, and I realized that all the time and labor and effort going into building that wasn't really my cup of tea, and my specialty is teaching. That's what I love to do. And I decided I would, rather than franchise, I decided I would then, if you will, sell my knowledge in a teaching environment. So that was 1991 when boot camp started. And you're right, it's a total immersion experience, if you will. It lasts 4 days. The tuition is all inclusive. It includes you lodging. It includes ground transportation, all meals. It literally has changed many people, the scope and direction of many people's businesses in the industry. And I think it's pretty fair to say that therefore it's really helped move our industry forward. And as I say that, I realize that maybe some of your listeners don't realize what I'm talking about when I'm talking about our industry, because actually that's a bit of a moving target too.
You know what? It's so true. And when you say the direction of the industry, I think without what you did, I mean, without saying, hey, let's focus on kids rather than just the sports themselves and the games and the scores, it's allowed the whole industry to do more good for more kids, because I just can't imagine if, we went another decade just in, athletics in general, and not giving like the gift of sports to more kids by focusing on customers and not scores. So I thank you for that, because I definitely wouldn't be where I am. And when you said change the direction of so many gyms, it's really, really impactful. I know there's, 3,500, there's, probably give or take another 1,500, you may know. I mean, do you know how many, enrichment or enhancements, children's after school enhancement places there are? I mean, what's in the US?
I would put the number as my best guess at 3,500 to 4,000 of various genres.
Yeah. And we all know that if it's strictly competition focused, many of those places, most of those places wouldn't be in business. I would think that.
It's very difficult to support a business with just the tip of the pyramid of any sport, which would be the competitive tip. The competitive tip is very difficult if that's exclusively what the operation has. It's very difficult to support the real estate necessary for it. So that's why we began to focus on the instructional piece of the pie many, many years ago.
Well, you were a coach first, and I've heard this several times from you, so I've stolen it and repeated it, that I started a business to support my coaching habit. And
very true.
So how did you know when it was time to switch?
I can tell you the day.
Wow. Oh, this is exciting. Okay.
I cannot. I can date the month. It was 1978, and it was April, probably March or April, and we had just had a particularly tough competition, and I was the head coach at the time. That our kids hadn't performed too well. And I was staring out the window of my very small office into the side yard, and I saw, it was raining. And so it was a gloomy Cincinnati March day. It was raining, and the water was puddling in the corner of the between the office and the building. And I was just staring out there, feeling sorry for myself because of the poor performance. And as I continued to stare at that puddling water, the realization hit me: it wasn't water; it was fuel oil. And the landscapers had nicked the copper pipe that went from our underground fuel oil tank into our building, I guess, as they were cutting the grass, and it had then pumped out into the grass. And that was the low point of my career, where I said, I was in classic burnout at that time. And I remember saying to myself, I've either got to figure out how to run a business, or I got to get out of this gig. and get a real job. So at that time, I decided to become a student for the first time in my life. There's none of my teachers would call me the student of students by any means. But so at the age of approximately 28, I decided to become a student for the first time in my life. And I went about finding out what business is really about. So I read the books. I listened to the, again, dating myself, the cassette tapes. That's before the podcasts here. And I became an avid student of business, but I learned a whole lot during the starting at that particular period of time when I decided. So basically, it was burnout that moved me to figure out how to go about really running a business. And your statement that's why my business was created, was to fulfill my coaching habit. But I decided there was another way to go about that.
I've never heard that story, and I'm so glad that I did.
I think many entrepreneurs have had their gloomy March moments.
I'm feeling a segue here because I know about your principles, and it's something that I've always admired. And if you could talk a little bit about, I'm not, asking you to like list them or anything, but I know that Kids First has principles that you guys abide by in different areas. And I would love for you to share a little bit about that.
I realized that I was operating in the land of chaos, and that if there were principles where it could be governed by principles, basically everything else doesn't matter. That life could become and business could become a lot neater and cleaner. And so we established at that time what we call our 7 unifying principles. In addition to those, we had a mission statement. So then we had 7 unifying principles. We later added 11 teaching principles, and then our 7 hiring mantras. And all those collectively we refer to as the Kids First 26 points, which would be basically the paper form of our value system. That's the value system of Kids First Sports Center. There's 26 points.
It's so great. I mean, a lot of companies have core values, and there's some that don't, and some that do, and some that put them on the wall and don't actually use them. That's I found what most people do. But when you can create those values that you use in your language and in your teaching on a daily basis, it just becomes. It gets easier, and it gets for us, I know the communication is so much easier. It's so much easier to like say the hard thing because everybody is on the same page. Well, I guess that brings me to the question. You always talk about how that 500 number, or 3 programs, I think is what it is. That would be an example of, okay, it's time for your business to go to the next level. How did you reach that conclusion?
Okay, well, I'll explain it's what I refer to as the 503 rule. And this is if you'll envision an operation that is an instructional operation and has 500 students. And amongst those 500 students, maybe there's 3 separate programs going on. Because for every additional student one might have, you bring another level of complexity. And for every new program you have, you bring another level of complexity. And what I found from my experience through boot camp, and then looking back, my own personal experience too, is that once an operation reaches about 500 students and about 3 programs, then one of a few things needs to happen. Making the assumption that business that was operating up to that 500 point was operating on a hub and spoke organizational strategy, where you can guess who was the hub, and then there were many spokes. Making that assumption that business was operating on a hub and spoke organizational strategy, once you reach that 503 level, then the thing with the variety of things that can happen is that you're going to just simply you're going to then move to more of a hierarchical organizational strategy, or you're going to stay the same. You're going to stick with your hub and spoke, and you're going to put a cap on your organization's ability to grow, or you're going to try to grow, remain in the hub and spoke strategy, and then just slowly go insane. So that's what happens once your business gets reaches that complexity level. And as you pointed out, and the triple rule is not one that I've really uttered before or thought about too much, but yet I can say this, that when an organization starts, a small business starts, a hub and spoke strategy just might be the ticket to get that thing going and to get it kick-started. But there comes a point where the hub and spoke strategy that worked so well no longer works. And then we have to reorganize that business and because it's become, as you said, a different kind of business. So for the gymnastics industry, the swim school industry, et cetera, that seems to happen once you get about 500 students. Now, I've used that rule in talking with, thousands of people in our industry. And whenever I might be talking with a group about this subject and explain the 503 rule, it's uncanny how many acknowledgments, nodding of the heads, rolling of the eyes that you might get in the audience, people that can relate to that. And I might add that when that Drury March Day story that I told you, when I reached the bottom, when that was the bottom of my career, and I realized that things had to change, it's not coincidental that our enrollment was right about at 500 students at that time.
I wonder if there's any correlation to dollars, like in gross sales. And the only reason I say that is because I was at a conference where they talked about, first of all, like the percentages of small businesses that actually stay in existence. And I don't remember the facts or figures because I can't share those, but let's just say it's not very many. The percentage of small businesses that actually make it like after so much time. And then there's a really small percentage of small businesses that ever get to $1 million in gross sales. And then there's another big drop, like there's another big chunk that never get to 5. And then a big chunk that doesn't get to 10. But then after 10, apparently it like if you can make it to 10, you're like, you're good to go, I guess. Like, not that you're not good to go at 1, but I'm just saying I just wonder if there's actual dollars that would correspond to that. I know for us, like, HR became something. There was so much more money that we had to spend on internal and back end stuff rather than forward facing to the client. You know, the non-revenue producing hours went way up as the business grew. So I don't know, just something
I'd say there probably is, but that might be somewhat industry specific. Because there certainly is a critical mass that one must hit in a business at various levels in order for that business to begin to be self-perpetuating. I'd say that dollar amount probably changes depending on the industry.
You're right. The critical mass, that's the key point. I've always just in recent years, again, as entrepreneurship has become cool, you hear numbers of, a $2 million company, $5 million company, this, that, or whatever. And it just makes me think, like, I know what that means. And it really, the only thing that matters is like what's going in the bank account, right? Like what's the end result after you subtract everything. And people just don't want to tend to look at that sometimes. And I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. Well, let me ask you this, and you may have to think a little bit, but this will be, I'm interested to know this answer. What is a change that you've made over the course of your years in business that you're the most proud of?
That was the transition from being a boss to a leader. I went into business believing that a boss's job was to direct the people to get the things done, whatever those things may be. And so it was good-hearted. There was nothing evil I was not a malevolent dictator. On the other hand, I was a director, and I directed, and I thought that's what a boss was supposed to do. And that's what began to tire me out and burn me out, more accurately stated. I went searching for a better way, if you will, and I began to learn that my whole mindset surrounding this thing called bosshood, and I use that in quotes because I don't call myself a boss. I'm not really necessarily fond of the word, but it captures what I'm speaking about here. My whole mindset surrounding what my job was as the boss changed 180 degrees.
So it's funny that you say that boss to leader. I was like just thinking about this concept last weekend. I had the opportunity to talk a little bit about business at Region 5. And I used that concept because that was something that actually, when I met my husband, he told me, he said, you are a business owner before you are anything else. Basically, if your responsibility is to give somebody a paycheck where they feed their family, then that has to be the number one priority over being a coach or an attorney or an insurance salesman. Whatever your business may be, your number one priority has to be to the business because other people are counting on you. And I guess it totally doesn't equate from boss to leader, but for me, it was shifting my identity into what my purpose was. So the notion of being a leader was something that I'd never even considered in myself. And for those people out there that are listening that are either bosses or coaches or owners that don't consider themselves leaders, I think they put themselves at a big disadvantage because it really changes your job. When you look at when you wake up every day and say, I'm a leader, it totally changes the path of the way you make decisions. Totally.
It absolutely does. It was, and that was that mindset shift that I was speaking about. If I can put some more words to it, a boss typically looks at themselves as a director, someone who's directing people to do the thing to get the job done. A leader is somebody who puts their energy not in directing people, but in learning how to influence others, to voluntarily give their best self towards the accomplishment of the thing, of the goal, of the task. So it's somebody that a word that equates to that is somebody that inspires others to give their best self. And I say, and the emphasis being voluntarily give their best self. So when I talk about voluntarily giving their best self, one thing that I learned with certainty in that coming of age era was that you cannot demand excellence. All of us want in our people, and all entrepreneurs, they want excellence from their people. And excellence, you might be able to demand mediocrity, maybe, if the wind is blowing the right direction, but you'll never demand excellence. Excellence is something that is given because that person has decided that's the way I'm going to go about my job. That's the way I'm going to go about my life. So by our definition, a leader is somebody who's learned the skill to inspire someone to give that excellence to the job. Can't be demanded.
Very well said. Very well said. It has been amazing having you on this show, and I could listen to you talk for hours. I definitely want to have you back because I have a list of like 10 more questions that I would love to be able to ask you. And I guess I should probably just go back to boot camp. So anyway, thank you so much for being on the Sports Entrepreneur. Could you tell everyone where they can connect either for more, if they want to know more about you or boot camp or what you do, can you share where they could find more information?
Absolutely. At metzgerbootcamp.com, and that's METZGER, bootcamp.com. And we still have a telephone, too. And the telephone number that you can call to our bricks and mortar operation is 513-489-7575. And you can ask for Lindsay Lindsay is our executive assistant, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a more delightful person or more helpful person. So Lindsay could help you through with answering questions and giving you any information that you might like to have about boot camp.
Thanks so much. And I just want to mention to our listeners, if you're listening internationally, the last 2 times I've been to boot camp, there have been people from at least 3, maybe 4 other countries, all the way from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the UK, literally, if you happen to be listening to this and you're from in the children's enrichment space, this is the place to be, because people come from all over the world to attend boot camp. So that is my plug that I receive nothing for. Everybody, it's truly because he gave me so much. I just want to let everybody know that it's an amazing experience. So I hope to see you there. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
There are a couple things that stood out to me in this week's conversation. Sports businesses are most successful when they focus on instruction and not just the competition. Jeff talked about the 500-3 rule and when to use it and how it changes the structure of your business, which I thought that was really interesting. And lastly, bosses, coaches, or owners that don't consider themselves leaders are putting themselves at a big disadvantage. Your job and the way you make decisions changes when you wake up every day and say, I'm a leader. All right, that's it from us. Now we'd love to hear from you. Tweet at your host, Casey, at CaseyWrightNZ, or shoot us an email at podcast@theninjazone.com. And as always, be sure to use our hashtag, #TheSportsEntrepreneur. Are you still curious about who we are and what we do over at Ninja Zone? Check out our website at theninjazone.com. Join us next week for another conversation on how you too can turn your passion into profit.
You can catch our show wherever you access podcasts via iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Play. Check the links to products and resources discussed in this week's show at thesportsentrepreneur.com. That's THE sportsentrepreneur.com. And while you're there, send me your guest requests and the questions you want answers to. Thank you, and join me next week for another sports business conversation.